Why did you get out of bed this morning? This is an interesting question. It took me a long time to understand the question, let alone answer it. And this relates to our topic today that we're talking about, knowing yourself and what you stand for. How do you live your life? What do you want to do? How do you enjoy yourself? How do you find your sense of purpose? How do you make sure that you enjoy every moment of the day? These are questions that Julian Roberts and I explore as we ponder knowing yourself and what you stand for.
Welcome to Share.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to a Pondering Life episode of the Share.care podcast. Our belief is that global peace starts at home. Feeling safe, valued, and heard gives you a foundation to confidently step out and make the world a happier and safer place for everyone. Because in today's world, it's in your own best interest to help others. G'day, Julian. How are you? Good to see you again.
Good to see you, Damien. I like our sort of monthly chats. It's always good. Always good to have this conversation. I always come away thinking new things. So, yeah, it's very worthwhile.
Yeah, same with this. And I was really looking. It's been a busy few days at my end, but I was really looking forward to this because I find it quite relaxing. And I was looking forward to talking about knowing yourself and what we stand for, which is knowing what you stand for, which is an interesting topic. And I've been pondering a lot about that, going different points in my life. What have I stood for, and have I stood up for that, and have I known who I am? It's a very broad topic.
It's a massive topic, and I think it's one of those things. I always think it's and a whole cliche. Life's it's on a journey, isn't it? And it is a journey, and I think it's even knowing yourself is a journey. Getting to know yourself. I think we endeavor to try and know each other selves better each day. I think it's as we get new experiences, as we get exposed to things, we start to realize or reflect back on things. So I don't think you can say you've arrived. I think you can get to the core bits, but there's always things that you learn and you discover, don't you? Think, I didn't realize that about myself, or why I liked a certain thing or a certain situation, or why something triggered you, or I don't know. And I think it's having that. I always feel it's important to have that, I suppose, a learning mindset, isn't it? A growth mindset, whatever. It's always wanting to discover new things, not just about yourself, but also the rest of the world, and I guess being open to that change that comes with that.
Yeah, well, as you say, it's a process. And I was thinking about it too from the perspective of, I was looking at my dad, for example. I was looking at my dad and his life, and I was, because he worked in the same organization his entire career. And I was wondering about that from the perspective of knowing yourself and choosing your own path. And I was linking that to, and maybe I've watched too much Star Wars, but whether you control it or it controls you, because people talk about having to find yourself, and you go off on this quest and journey and try and find yourself, or can you just choose and say, this is what I want to be? And I was thinking, putting that in context of my dad, who worked in the same position all his life. He never really had. It was never really. I don't know if he didn't have the choice, but it wasn't really even something that was. I don't think was ever in his conscious awareness to choose to do or to work for a different organization. He did different jobs within that organization, but to choose to live somewhere else, to go, so he's never, lived anywhere but the same region. And I compare that to my own life, where I've, at 18, I joined the army and ended up on the other side of the country, and then went to work in mine sites in the northern part of Australia. When Australia's a big country, compare it to Europe. Is it Ukraine's, because that's relevant in the news at the moment. Ukraine, I think, is about half the size of New South Wales, which is one of the smaller states in Australia. So, I travelled and lived in a lot of different places, and when I was looking about that, and who am I? When I was younger, it's like, well, firstly, I was comparing it to my dad and going, well, he didn't have a choice. So is it something that we have a choice to do, and we can be whoever we want to be? Or is it something that we are actually, as a higher powers or however, that have ordained us to say, sort of be something, and we've got to find that. So I'm still wondering about that from my perspective. I'm kind of leaning towards, I've chosen that this I want to do, but did I choose it, or did I just eventually find it because I'm 50 now and it kind of...
It's interesting. It is, because I know there's a lot of stuff about this now. I know my children now talk about, finding their purpose, their destiny, their thing, and which wasn't 30 years ago, wasn't even talked about at all. Finding your passion and finding something you enjoyed was important. And it's interesting about, whether is it something that we pursue, or is it something that comes to us? And it's probably an element of both. I always feel there's a like two sides to the coin on life, isn't there? It's not always a binary. It's this way, it's that way. There's a sort of combination of that. I know for my own journey, I'm a coach now, but I didn't wake up, years ago desiring to be a coach many years ago. And it's something that's probably only come from reflecting on life. And it was for me when I look back at my life, and I look back at situations, look back at my 20 years in the food industry, in sales. It was the people side, bizarrely, was what I enjoyed most. And that's what used to frustrate a lot of other sales type leaders. Yeah. But I used to love the people bit. I used to love the development side. I remember some HR person did a throwaway and said, "Oh, you should work in HR," which is just one of those things I think back and it was interesting. I developed competency frameworks for developing people. Just naturally, this thing sort of happened, and I was in sales, and I'm sales. I do make negotiations and deals, but I had this, and the revelation of that only happened in retrospects, on reflecting, on pondering, and that came at a time when I was in a not very good environment, toxic, that was causing me to think about what I should do. So I think sometimes we don't always know in the moment. I think sometimes it's allowing that process, that journey to unfold, and just sometimes to reflect back and think, what was going on there? What were you liking? What was giving you energy? What was exciting? What were you good at? What was that sense of that? And I think that's sometimes important to do. And as I've realized that's why I do coaching. And weirdly enough, when I coach somebody, I'm just so, I feel, my energy levels are just so on point and so aligned to what I should be doing. But I didn't know that 30 years ago when I left university. So I had no clue. But interesting, even now, and I'm thinking back, I always had this very consultative approach to selling, and I was quite naturally consultative, listening. And I remember lots of salespeople naturally talk a lot and almost get themselves into situations because they talk first. And I had this. I never saw myself as a sort of a typical salesperson in that sense. Sort of not. So there's no typical one as such, but I used to go and meet sort of clients and stuff and do lots of listening naturally. and then target what I was going to say based on what I heard, and
Yeah.
that's good selling, and that's very good selling. But at the
Mm.
time, it was not really deemed as that, and so
Mm.
actually, I already look back and think actually I was already using that skill, that talent of listening and understanding
Mm.
there as what I do as a coach. So I guess that's for me. It's more the reflection. I start to realize what I do and how I do things, and what makes me buzz and gets excited.
Yeah, because it's interesting in that reflection, and I remember working with a career coach once, and I can't remember how that came about. Actually, now that I think about it, I remember working with a coach, but I can't remember why. Um, and there was a whole bunch of questions about all sorts of, and I remember having a couple of meetings with him about all sorts of stuff about who you are, and I'd answer questions and I got in trouble because I wasn't being deep enough or something, and probably I was being a little bit of a smart ass about it, um, when if I was thinking about it, if I'm gonna be honest. Um, and I wondered what that was, 'cause I look at and when I look at what I do now, and it's just, what you stand for, um, I guess I probably always did that kind of stuff. I liked helping people and, like, trying to work with to try and solve things and move things forward, make things easier. And maybe that's because I'm anally retentive and lazy, so I don't like doing things the hard way. I like to try and find it. um, but I still struggle with that. They're trying to work out how did I choose this, or was it part of what's ingrained in me? Because it's like I know there's a couple of times where I've been in a position where I've had to do jobs that were sucked, if you're to look at it, but I made them fun and I enjoyed it,
Mhm.
and there was other jobs where I just didn't like it at all. I remember, and I was always, I don't know, I suppose I'm not alone, but always chasing money and wanted to have some degree of wealth, and one for whatever reason I thought real estate would be the great way to do that. Um, and so I found these real estate agents that they seemed pretty good, and they had this training thing, and they paid you. It wasn't all commission. You had a salary as well. And I did the test, and they thought I was brilliant. They said after that I got the highest in anyone that had done the test before, and they thought I was going to be this superstar. Which they told me afterwards. Um, but then I started working there, and it wasn't what I thought it was to be. Um,
Mm.
and I'm not sure, what that was, but the factor that I didn't really enjoy it that much when I was in there for whatever reason. I'm not sure why that was. Um, but the factor for me was when I decided I don't want to do this was one of the other more successful agents that had been there for a while, was telling the story how he'd found another odometer for his car. He was selling his car and he'd found one that had lower kilometers on it, and then he found another one, and he was changing the the odometer on his car so that it looked like it had less traveled less. And I went, "This is not for me. I'm not this kind of person." And that was it was an interesting moment. We talk about who are you and what do you stand for, because
Mm.
I was like, I can't do that. And if that's what this is, working in real estate is, creating fiction and then making a profit off it. I'll put it that way. I'll put it politely that way. I was like, I don't want to do that. And maybe that was my motivation for getting out, because I didn't really like doing the job in the first place. Um, and it was interesting that because other jobs that, I remember a job where I was sorting through spreadsheets, which was really sucky, like 10 of thousands of lines that hadn't been, the columns weren't right. So you had to move this data across,
Mm.
um, which is boring as batshit. But I found a way to make it fun and try and make it a challenge to try and sort things and make that work. And and that was fun, and I enjoyed that. Whereas this job that potentially could have made a lot of money, but compromised my character. Um,
Did you just on that character thing?
mm,
Before that instant where that person was obviously fiddling
mm.
the mileometer thing, did you have a sense beforehand that things were not quite right, even before you saw something obvious as that?
No, I don't recall. Maybe I did. I don't recall that. I and part of me probably was a bit immature as well because it was a lot of fun just running around. I remember we went to a conference. We traveled to Sydney and went to a conference there. And I was late because I was drunk the night before. And so it was a bit out of because I remember bashing my door to wake me up, and I was just out of I was so hungover I couldn't get up, and then finally managed to get out, and I was late for the conference. Not that but it was yeah. So I didn't have a sense of I don't recall having a sense that there was something untoward there. And I don't think it was the organization as a whole. I think it just was that person. But the fact that
Mm,
that person was doing that and other people either went along with it or
mm,
turned a blind eye to it, I was like, I don't. That's and I guess that's part of the moral values I was brought up with. My parents were very much, be honest. Um, and I remember as a kid and not liking injustice. I remember as a kid where we used to go to the local pub for dinner every now and then, and I distinctly remember it. Um, I was I was only young. I must have been 5 or 6 or something like that, and they had the old jukebox, so it was records. That's I, I, I that's how I'm old. That I'm that old.
I'm
But
with you, Damien.
yeah. But they had the jukebox playing, and there was and they must have been late teens. They were there by themselves, so they weren't there with a parent. And they were sitting next to the jukebox, and it was a wooden floor. And as the jukebox was playing, they were jumping up and down on the seat, not standing on it, but just making the record skip. And I got really upset because I'm like, that's damaging the record. How dare that's wrecking property. And I was really, really distraught about it. My parents wouldn't do anything about it. And it was like, or I don't know if they did or didn't, but I felt that's my memory now. Um, and I was really upset that they were wrecking these records. And they probably weren't wrecking the records anyway, it was just skipping. Um, and but I put that down to some of the upbringing that I got as to knowing who I am. There was always this thing about injustice that I always hated bullies, that kind of thing. And so those parts I knew who I was. But other parts of, well, what did I want to do? Um, I was more for me. It was more running away. I joined the army
Mm.
to get out of school, and then when I was in the army, I realized I didn't want to be there. So I waited until I'd served my time and got out of there. And then friends said that be some good money working in the mine site, so that's where I went. And then after being up there for a while, I decided it was impetuous leaving that, and probably a little bit petulant as well, because I can't remember. There was a they had it was a really good and great working environment, and then the shot firer, the guy that does all the explosives, um, uh, he went on leave, and they had this other guy come that wasn't. I didn't think he was very safe. Let's say, and when dealing with explosives, and he did something. I can't remember. Yeah, as I remember, he actually drove over some of the charge cord that was there, and I'm like, what? And so I cracked it and said, to the boss, you either get rid of him or you get rid of me. And given that I was, there was only one shot firer there, and there was multiple people doing my skill, it became pretty clear who was going. But I was like, all right, I'm going, and I left, and I was dating someone who was actually at the mines as well. So she actually came with me, which was kind of, when I think back about it, that's, she decided, oh, we're going to go do something else. Yeah. So I'm just wondering about that. Like when we, again, do we find our path, or is it, because
Well, you're talking like those sort of values, aren't they? They're
mm,
sort of like, I don't know, metrics that are, but are they deeply sort of
Mm.
there, or they come from what we model, what we've seen model within our family or in our
Mm.
upbringing, I guess. And I think that, it's the whole nature nurture thing, isn't there?
Yeah.
And there's an element of, I do believe it's both. I think I've had situations where I've seen the power and the impact of nurturing somebody and
Mm.
seeing the change, taking somebody from a not a very great environment
Mm.
to something that's a bit more positive, and seeing them transform. And I've seen, I remember somebody working for me once who we ended up making them redundant. They just weren't cutting it.
Mm.
Whatever reason, and not, I would deem I'm quite a good leader and everything else, but just the environment, or this entrepreneurial environment I was working in, they just weren't performing, and we had to sort of let them go,
Mm.
unfortunately. But they went somewhere else, and they just took off, and
Mm.
it's interesting sometimes the different environment, and whether that was down to the fact of me pointing out something,
Mm.
gave them a bit of a kick at the backside sort of thing. I don't know. Or was it the environment was just more conducive, who they were working for? And I
Mm.
think there's a real impact on the environment. And I think, it's, the old adage of, making sure we have the right environment around ourselves.
Mm.
But I think that, I think a lot of values come from what we observe, I guess, in our families, and what they perceive
Mm.
as, what they see as values. And you've probably had grown up that to do the right thing, to respect property, and
Mm.
not do things that potentially hurt people, damage people. And I guess that it translates in it, and it's like culture and organization, culture of your family, it all
Mm.
translates. And I know I've got a real value of, when you commit to something,
Mm.
you honor it.
Mm.
Sometimes it gets a bit silly. Sometimes I remember I committed to picking somebody up from an airport, some friends, this many years ago. Come back from the honeymoon, and
Yeah.
it was coming in about, I don't know, 7 in the evening, which is obviously fine.
Mm.
And for whatever reason, it got delayed, and they weren't going to get into about 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
But I'd committed, and so
Yeah.
in my head, that was it, and I was there. Which
Yeah.
you got to honor these things, and
Yeah.
they went, "Oh, we didn't think you'd be here. It's 2 o'clock in the morning." Da, 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 da. We would have understood. This was the day when you didn't have a way to communicate with people.
Yes.
30 years ago. So you couldn't FaceTime. Sort of, "Oh, no, I said I would be here. I'm here." And I think my girls, my kids have that sort of thing about them. They always either they know if I commit to something, I'll be there and do that. And I think
Mm.
a lot of translates to that, talk about honoring whatever you say you're going to do. If you
Mm.
pay this, do that. Do it in a way that's honoring to that. Obviously, there's options. Sometimes you can't do things because of circumstances comes up. Life
Mm.
happens. But at best, if you can honor it, honor it. And I think that value can come through your, I think initially through your friends, and I guess a lot of these things we discover what irks us, what makes us, what annoys us, what or whatever is, and then we start to realize. And I think the key to all this is trying to reflect. We're doing it now, but it's almost what driving over that wire and nobody else was in your instance of the mine. Why did that bother you? It's like, what is it about that? Is it just that person, or is it the thing, or what is it?
Mm.
And why are other people not it? And it's that I think we need to spend more time just reflecting on things, and even think, I was organization and I was absolutely flying. I went to another organization and it all went a bit, you know, just couldn't get going. And what was it about? And understanding, what are the values, what are those working that really make you sort of, really sort of have great impact. And and passionate about things and really to you. And I think that to me is how you start to discover a bit more your values. You discover it almost chart bouncing against things that are they're aligned or not aligned, and if they're aligned, that's great. If they're not, you'll feel a bit of a jarring going on, and that's okay. And that's actually that doesn't feel right. I remember when I joined one company, and it's funny. At the time, I couldn't put my finger on it. You try and get the best out of it when you get through the interview process. I remember sitting in the office the first day, and I just so I don't know what I couldn't even tell you now what it was. Just didn't feel right. So I started, and it just bothered me for a few months, and I couldn't perform as I expected I could do form, and then I started to realise how they operated, what they thought of people, the way they used to quite. But it basically was a toxic. I'd picked that up early on, know what it was, and I think some a sense of, I guess, gut feel sometimes, because generally you're probably right. You need to obviously explore it and understand it, but explore those just doesn't feel right. Not for whatever reason, and I just need to understand a bit more about that.
Where do you think that gut feel comes from? I mean, because what you're talking about there is, and because we have that, and is that, and because I wonder about that, um, is it some higher purpose that's there, or is it just you? If you're paying attention to it, it's your unconscious noticing things that that maybe that you're consciously not aware of, but that it is something from what's deep inside you. If
Yeah, I would say it's aspects that's sort of revealing itself. It's like when you hear somebody speak and they talk about, I'm a man of integrity. And you think, really?
yeah,
And immediately you observe, or you're aware of that they're not at all, and you get this almost cognitive dissonance. And I think a little bit of that, but probably in an unconscious way. You sort of interact with somebody or a situation, and suddenly it just doesn't feel right, and because you're not entirely aware of it, I think it's that unconsciousness of your values, or what you perceive as being those principles that you've sort of live by. Not that we're perfect, aim to sort of live by, and what you've observed is what's good rather than what's bad. I guess we almost try and create that sort of modelling, I guess, which sometimes restrict us. We could be thinking that's the way we should always do things, but actually, there's different ways of doing things, and sometimes a different perspective on it. But I think it's that unconsciousness that just suddenly we have that feeling, and I think we just got to observe, and it might be nothing, it might be something.
What about because I look at now, for me, I have a higher purpose, a bigger mission. One thing I did was I created my own mission statement, and then from that as well, I created there's a higher. I'm aware of this wanting to give back and make the world a better place, and there's some specific areas around that where I want to do that, and I'm aware that that's what I want to do. Everywhere I go, I want to make it a better place. Whereas before I kind of did, but I wasn't really conscious of that. Um, and I'm just maybe that was my journey to find that and become aware of that, whether I became aware of, or whether I chose it. It was always, I think that's what they're jumping up and down on the records, and wanting to stop them doing that is make the world a better place. Um, and I'm just, wondering, does it help to actually have and identify that purpose to make, when you knowing what you stand for, make that easier in your life?
I think it does help Because otherwise,
I'm just going to switch because I think I've got an issue on the internet. Are you still there? I lost you for a second. Is that you back?
yeah, was that me or you?
I'm not sure. I think it might have been me, but I switched. The internet wasn't performing well, so I'm not sure if it's across the Atlantic or it's not the Atlantic, but anyway, um, my geography's well out. Um, yeah. Anyway, because I was about the having that higher purpose, and obviously I'm jumping right ahead here now because we're talking about knowing yourself and what you stand for, but I know now, because I want to leave wherever I am, whatever I'm doing, just that little bit better, including myself. Better, not better, better. I remember I speak to someone from England, so I've got to get my English right. But I'm wondering, from that perspective, is it, because, and that's a pretty global thing, wanting to leave the things a better place. But I find for me, it really guides me in the sense of having a great day. Even, I mean, today, like I said, it was a long day because I mean, yesterday we had to go to a meeting which I had to travel 2 hours to get there, then 2 hours to come home. I was late, then I had to get up early. I think I had about 5 hours sleep, and then had travel. I had 5 hours travel today. But even with all that and feeling tired, and I had a couple of meetings, and now we're having this meeting. I'll call it a meeting. It's more fun than a meeting, but we but all through that, even though I was doing that, I still had this thing of I want to, try and make the world a better place. And part of that is me having an attitude that's going to enable to do that. And so even if I was tired and there's a couple of issues with one of the organizations I'm in and some people behaving inappropriately. And, I could feel myself going, okay, I'm getting to a reactive state here. So I pulled myself back and said, okay, just put some
Mm,
space there, because I want to make it better. Um, and and I'm just wondering, is that when we look at that, is it easier to start and go, let's start with something broad? And even I created a mission statement many years ago, which has been very, I mean, and my mission statement is very broad as well. It's I enjoy life and sharing the joy of others. Learn something daily that increases my ability to overachieve. I had to put overachieve in there. I couldn't just achieve. I put overachieve and confidently and compassionately act for my values of honesty, excellence, and understanding. And again, that's very, very broad, but I found it really guides me no matter what and because it's broad, it applies to so many different, or almost that applies to everything, really.
mm,
Um, and I'm just wondering from that, knowing yourself, whether it's, and I look back at my life, had I known that when I was, say, a teenager, would that have affected, not that I want to change my life, but I just wonder
mm,
how that would have played out, and whether that's a place to start rather than trying to work out what job you want to have or something like that. What
mm,
character traits? Because I spent with my son, who's now 14, but when he was very little, as much as education was important, I spent more time focusing, or not more time, more emphasis focusing on character, do the right thing. And I think that now has served him quite well. He's very organized in his study and quite smart. And I was teaching him with study. I said, well, if you come home from, the way your brain works, if you come home from school and you just review everything you've done on the day, take you 20 minutes to do that, it'll help you out later on. And so he actually just started doing that. I didn't tell him he had to do it. I just suggested that would make
mm,
his, and he did that. And then I noticed he'd stopped doing that. And I just inquired, and he goes, well, he says, if I do it at school, I don't have to do it at home. I can have more fun doing what I want to do. And I went, well, okay. That's what I was just wondering from that perspective. Is it in knowing yourself, is it better to have that apply that broader brushstroke, which is then going to color your overall character, as opposed to you trying to be specific and go, I'm going to be X, Y, or Z, like a real estate agent.
Yeah, I think. I mean, to me, there's two things there. There's what I call purpose,
Mm,
whatever, why, your why, all that sort of stuff,
yeah.
and then there's values that drive to the behaviour and how you want to outwork that and live by
Mm,
that. Um, I think it's really important to get real clarity on that purpose,
mm,
and that can be broad to narrow. It doesn't matter, but some element of clarity,
mm,
or what I'd say consciously aware of it, of
yeah.
what that might be. And I think, whether is that influenced by my environment, my experience, possibly, is it just who I am? I think it doesn't really matter in some ways, but I think you can get real clarity. I do a lot of stuff with clients, and interestingly, recently working with a lot of clients in their 50s wanting to rediscover that purpose,
Okay.
that meaning for life. And not that
Mm,
they weren't doing anything meaningful, but just get real, what am I going to do for the next 15, 20 years? Real clarity about that, and
yeah.
get some awareness of that. And I think knowing your what your purpose is, and it could be very broad, it could be narrow, is
Mm,
really helpful then to then, whether it's job you do, where you live, how you go about things, what you get involved. It just
mm,
it navigates and helps you decide so much, so easy. It creates a filter. You
yeah.
know, I know when my broad, purpose is to unlock leadership potential,
Mm,
and I refine that as into, and also to empower and build resilience in individuals and teams. That's how I outwork that as well. And so, when I started my podcast a couple of years ago, it was on the back of me knowing that this would help unlock leadership potential, because I'm talking to people, leaders, CEOs, about leadership things and helping them organizations thrive. So it was an easy one for me, and that's what the passion of keeping that
mm,
going drives that, because I know this, people listen to it, whether it's one or hundreds, it doesn't matter. It
mm,
will unlock potential in people, because it makes people think about, whether it's a resilience story, or whether it's a how to create employee engagement, that ultimately will unlock potential in that organization that listens to it,
mm,
or the leader listens to it. And so that helps me, and with any projects I get involved with, anything I want to support. And often, in fact, all the clients I've worked with to help them get that clarity of purpose, um, it's always something about helping others. It's
mm,
it's not about making money. I remember talking to a wealth manager, and you think, oh, well, they just want to make loads of money. they do make loads, but this purpose of this individual is to help. He says, I want to help other people become financially stable,
mm,
rewarded, da 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 da. And that was his, and that's why he does things. And he went broad in that, actually, which then overlapped into his personal life and everything else, which gave him a real great perspective on the balance between working, family, and all that sort of stuff as well. So it really helped him with
mm,
that. So I think it's as best you can, and it's a discovery thing, because some people think you can go and do a session with a coach and you'll come out at the end of it with your clarity and your purpose in 1, 2, 3 steps. It doesn't work that way, and
mm,
humans don't work that way. And when I work with clients, they'll get, I don't say to them, you're going to get 100% clarity. I'm going to start you on this journey, because, and some people get real clarity really quickly, and that's fine, and some
mm,
take a little bit longer, but it's a road of discovery, and continues to unfold as you sort of develop and understand it better, and understand yourself better. But the ones who get it, it's a really powerful way. And I'd say, whatever age, I didn't really discover mine probably to about 6, 7 years ago.
mm,
Um, Although I had been acting in that way. Interesting. I'd already been acting in the way of unlocking potential, leadership potential in my job, but I wasn't in HR, I wasn't L&D, wasn't any sort of coaching. I was doing sales and I was leading teams. And so I was already acting it before I even knew what it was, you know what I mean? Which is interesting. But I remember one client came to me, they wanted to do a career change in the next 3 or 4 years, and they weren't too sure what that was. And then we did this purpose thing with them, and over a number of sessions, and they realized, actually, because he had some ideas of what he thought he was going to do, but actually by getting clarity on his purpose, it made it really clear what he should be doing in 3 or 4 years' time. But also what it did, it created a real impact and energy and passion for his day-to-day stuff as an MD of a company. And so it also reignited his passion again for his day job, rather than just looking for the next 3 years when I'm going to change my job. But actually, my purpose is this, and I work it out now, not just in 3 or 4 years' time. It's something that works and lives with you all the time. I think it's, if you can take some time out to really get some clarity or work with somebody to help you, that it will help you so much in careers and everything else in life as well.
You think that, because you talked about purpose, there's a couple of things that I made some notes of what you're talking about, but when you're talking about the purpose, the part again seems to come back to is in some way helping others. It was interesting. I went before as I was talking, also pulled up my original. I've got a document called My Identity, and right below that mission statement that I wrote out many years ago, I wrote under that and I bolded it. It says, how do I choose to make the world a better place? And then, because that links to what I was talking about before, and what you were talking about here, your purpose. Your purpose. I haven't looked up the word in the dictionary recently, but it sounds like your reason for being. And if your reason for being is just about you, it kind of doesn't really have it's not really a reason.
No.
It's and that's why I'm wondering this whole purpose. As you were talking, there's two parts about that stood out. So one, it seems to be in knowing yourself as well. Part of that for it to really be fulfilling. I haven't met anyone that is fulfilled and has been focused on themselves. And all the people that I know that are really successful, and even, from a monetary perspective, if I just use that, people that I know that are really wealthy, they are all about helping other people, and through that, they've actually made a lot of money. But the reason for doing it wasn't about getting. I mean, they wanted wealth, but they wanted to help people as well. And so even business. A friend who's got a tile business. It was about providing cheap quality tiles to people, which is again helping people. But in this process of taking, so I'm pulling that out, going, well, okay, to find your purpose in knowing yourself, it really needs to be connected to somehow helping other people or helping the place be better. Otherwise, it really is not a purpose. And maybe I'm wrong on that, but that's kind of what I'm feeling as we're talking through that, and as I'm thinking through it. The other two parts that stood out was I wrote down decision making. I can't remember specifically the statement that was that why I wrote down it, but it was about making a decision, and then you talked about acting in that way. You were already acting in that way. And I'm just wondering from that side of things, in this finding, if knowing yourself, and if you don't know yourself, but is it a case of, choosing something, anything? I remember Wayne Dyer talking about that. He said, just do something. Doesn't matter. Do as long as you're doing something, you're moving. And then, which is to do something, you need to decide. So it's, in finding who you are, it's do something, and maybe that's inadvertently how I did it without actually. I'm trying to speed up the process here. If I could go back and tell a younger me, rather than spend 20 years trying to do this, here's a way you can actually get there a little bit quicker. And that's where I'm just wondering from that side of things, is it a case of, in knowing yourself, doing something, noticing how you're feeling, and deciding whether you're going to continue or then decide to do something else. And through that process, you may not, you know, um, you might avoid the chance of feeling lost because you're actually contributing in some way. If we got that overarching, I'm going to help people. Not really
I,
sure what I'm saying there.
no. I know what you're saying. No, because you don't discover a purpose in a vacuum.
No.
You
Yeah.
don't. It's we are beings, and we need to
Mm,
be, interacting and exploring and understanding, and we do that through exploring with things, and I think
mm,
it's important to not just think, right, what's my purpose, and just spend a few years just not doing anything until I've discovered it. Well, no, it's an initiative you discover as you discover. You know what I mean?
yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
it's like when people set out on a career, for example. I'm not entirely sure what they do. My daughter's has bounced around in the last probably 2 or 3 years of what she wants to do post university.
Mm,
And I think that's really good. She's just
mm,
pushing and going off in a direction and getting interested in that, and then going, nah, it's not for me. And pushing in this direction and standing, well, okay. And I think you need to put yourself in that place, in an environment, in a situation, experience something to then realize, does this align to me? Does that feel good here? Do I
mm,
perform my best, whatever my best is, because you don't know what you don't know,
mm,
basically, because so you don't know in something until you're actually in it,
yeah.
and you can only observe as much from the outside of something, but you don't get the fullness of something. If you go to I don't know, for example, a networking meeting, I was at there this morning. If I
Mm,
observed it from afar, just looking at this meeting of people wandering around, talking to each other, it's like, that's a bit strange. What's going on there? But until I
mm,
experience it, then I won't know that until I experience it. And then the important thing is then obviously to reflect on that, reflect on what did you experience, what were the emotions, how did you feel,
mm,
and were you performing at your best, whatever your best is? Did you feel excited? Did you feel passionate? Did you enjoy it? That starts to then create that quickly. Actually, this is what I like doing. Suddenly, I like
mm,
working with numbers. I work, whatever it may be, or I like helping this situation. And I
mm,
think we get caught up with trying to just almost bit like an apple tree doesn't just decide to bear fruit. It takes some time. It doesn't go, all right, now some fruit. And I think sometimes we get frustrated. Actually, just allow a process, allow experience, but be I guess cognitively aware of what's going on. So you're a bit more aware of your unconscious of stuff, how you feel, and that I
mm,
think with all these things, it's that reflection point, and then whether you journal things. People do. I don't journal so much. I've journaled sometimes on a video sort of type way
mm,
of journaling, but journaling is a really good way of reflecting on what
mm,
you're experiencing, what you're liking, and then when you reflect and look at your journals, you can then start seeing patterns of,
mm,
oh, when I was really doing really well, I was in this environment, or I was doing this, and that's a
mm.
good way I start to identify what your thing is. If you know what I mean. But yeah, don't find your thing first. Just head towards it and just start to discover. I think it comes by doing things and
Yeah.
experiencing. I think that's so important, not to sit in a vacuum and think I need to discover my purpose.
I
And
think that
that's
with
what's
that
all of
as
it.
well, when we're talking about the purpose, it relates to how you behave as well. Because I was looking at that a lot, and maybe because my background wasn't always um, good at communicating. Let's say sometimes I could be an angry person, but I mean, I grew up with some anger as examples, um, and maybe that's shaped now, me wanting because I want to there's things I want to achieve, and obviously being able to communicate better, being able to articulate and motivate people in a better, more efficient way is going to get results quicker.
Mm.
And creating an environment where you can motivate people to do things, and I know motivating as a leader. I mean, I've studied enough leadership to know that motivating people to do things because they want to do things, as opposed to with a big stick, gets better results. And this is where I'm wondering, from that perspective, with knowing who we are, knowing yourself, is it beyond this purpose? Because I now look at it from the examples of, I think I've mentioned before, I have these little clips of videos from movies that I like, that inspire me. And one of them, the very start of the clips is from the movie Roadhouse, where is Patrick Swayze's his bouncer, but he talks about be nice, ask them to leave, be nice, help them leave, be nice. So I had that there, and I also had, and recently discovered it when I was watching the movie Pretty Woman, and they're having this dinner, and he's going to take over this company. The other guy's getting really angry and things like that, and the old guy that's in charge, it's his company. He's going to storm off, but he goes to Richard Gere and says, "I'm going to rip you apart." And rather than get angry back, Richard Gere just politely turns back and says, "I look forward to it, sir." And I was looking at that from a behavior point of, and I said maybe it's because I have acted probably not in the best way in some situations. And for me, part of knowing who I am and developing, going on this journey, I'm looking at going, all right, this is part of the character, how I want to act. And that's where it comes back to, again, those values of honesty, excellence, and understanding. Part of that excellence, I'm going, well, I'm going to hold myself to a higher standard in situations where I'm going to behave in this confident, polite manner, still, going up, but do it politely. And I know that wasn't, I think it was a an intention that my parents had, but it wasn't always the example they set from experience. And if I can put it that way, I think a lot of people who experience parents yelling at each other and dealing with things maybe not in the most tactful manner, not just with each other but with other people. And I'm not sure why. Maybe because I look at that. I remember reading watching a video talking about the way people interact with each other, and how it was important. And we talked about giving and helping each other, how it was important. We learnt very early on, many thousands of years ago, that we needed to work as a community to survive, because if we just looked after ourselves, this comes back to this whole knowing, this giving part of the purpose. If we, just looked after ourselves, the group would push us out, and we'd be stuck by, and very quickly gobbled up by something. And that's where I was wondering, from that side of things, is it part of, this? I was thinking about with that, was that part of my driver to want to, work on this character side of things, of being more approachable and more friendly, because now I'm wiser and paying attention to it. I say wiser, not wise. It comes to learning to be wise. But is it, part of that is that going, okay, when we have a purpose, but do we need to add into that this whole character side of things, of how I'm going to go about things, as opposed to just, my purpose is to, to make the world a better place, but I'm going to make the world a better place by doing it politely, for example.
Yeah, I think I'm not. I say it's the value pieces, and that's what look at from an organisation point of view. That that the
You always have
mission
these great
statement is.
organizations, and when I say organization, I'm talking a lot, and you go, "Yep, that's the value piece." I love that. I love it so much.
Well,
Right.
no, I'm just saying that it's that sort of it's how it's the behaviors that
Yeah.
drive or how you go about doing
Mm.
things, that, and whether that's an organization or whether that's in your individual life,
Yeah.
it's
I
your,
did.
what do you call it, rules, or just however you
Yeah.
want to term it. It doesn't matter how you term. I think
Yeah.
if you've got clarity on your purpose,
Mm.
and uh, just because purpose is generally is bigger than you,
Yeah.
and it's generally in a
Mm.
helping mindset.
Yeah.
So, and it's usually outside of you, and so it's bigger and ahead of you, and quite far reaching, and in some ways slightly
Yeah.
unattainable in a healthy way, I think.
Yeah.
Then that already sets your intent to probably, if you're going to help somebody, you'll generally want to do it in a good way.
Yeah.
But helping somebody, if you're going to help somebody, you don't do it in a really nasty way. Generally, it
No.
doesn't tend to sort of work.
No.
But I think it's important then to almost bring that, as you've done, step down. Okay, how do I want to live my life? Is it through honesty? Is it integrity? Is
Mm.
it be kind? And whatever it may be, to sort
Mm.
of, I guess, bring those things that are implicit in you explicitly, and so
Mm.
you're just a bit more consciously aware of them, and so when you're sort of veering off, yeah, we're an organisation, or I'm an individual who
Mm.
wants to do things in a kind way, and I think, I didn't talk to that person in a very kind way. Actually, then you just check yourself and actually
Yeah.
think, actually, I need to go and either apologise, or there's
Mm.
no opportunity. I need to learn that actually that
Mm.
situation. Why was I thinking that? Why did I sort of go off my values? What was it? Was it stress? Was it whatever it may be?
Yeah.
And so I think the how piece, I think it's almost like the tracks, isn't it, of how you're going to go
Mm.
about things, to sort of make sure you outwork that in a way that's right, I guess, with your, what you perceive as your own values. But I think if you've got clarity in your purpose, they will generally be more positive values that would aid your helping in some capacity.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I didn't mean as an organization, as in a company organization. I mean, whenever I'm talking about something in a broad way, you go, "Oh, that fits under this category," and it's like, and I love that because it's like, "Oh, yeah, it does." It's like it helps define what it is, but it's one of those because I was looking at that in knowing yourself, and said maybe that's just my journey because well, it is my journey because of my background. Um, and I was just because I look at it from the perspective of, my son, and I go, "Well, how do I help him find, what his purpose is in life?" Because I look at it, I mean, he's not really gonna have to worry about money because he's already got money set up in his investment account, and he puts, by the time he gets to the point where he's gonna need it, he's pretty much gonna be self-sufficient anyway. Um
So you've already instilled a value there, haven't you, in terms
Yeah,
of
well, he
putting
doesn't
some
have to do any.
aside?
I talk about it. He doesn't. I said, "You at some point,
No,
I'm
I
going to show
know,
you how I do this." But
but I know you might be helping him, which is
yeah,
obviously, but you're putting a value of how to create sustainable wealth.
yes, yeah,
Now he may just blow it all
yeah.
and
Well,
just
I wonder
rebel.
about that because it's like you go because I mean, well, he got his. I think we've talked about this before. He was doing karate. Actually got his black belt.
Brilliant. Okay.
So yeah, so it was pretty cool. And so I gave him a reward for that, and it was substantial. I gave him $1,000. I said, "You can have $1,000." And so, what do you want to do with it? And he goes, "You." He goes, "Give me 250 and put the rest in the investment fund."
Ah,
Um, yeah,
there we go.
and because it's become also too because when I look at and I compare it to when I was a kid because I mean I remember I got a couple of grand and I went and blew it all straight, just bought all this shit that I probably didn't need. Um, and I mean I was how old was I then? I think I was probably 17 or something when I got that money, and I remember I bought these really awesome green and white sneakers. I think they cost about $400 or something. It was like, yeah, this is
Oh,
you know
that's a lot of money.
ridiculous. I know it's stupid, but anyway. But I look at him, and I struggle to buy him Christmas presents because he just doesn't want it. He's happy with his thing. I mean, anyway, and that's why I was looking at it from that perspective of how do I help him, find what's right for him. I mean, I spent a lot of time. working on values and him liking himself. I mean, it used to drive him nuts all the time saying, "Do you like yourself? Do you like yourself?" And he's like, "Yeah, Dad, I like myself. I'm all right." And so it's got to that point now where the teachers have noticed, they've said to me, he just goes his own way. He's happy to do his thing. He's not influenced or trying to impress other people. He's happy in his own space. So I think I've, done that job all right of him liking himself and being confident in his own ability. And then, I'm looking at going, well, how do I, help him, do something so that he's comfortable doing something with his life. Otherwise, get lost. So I kind of every now and then I take him different places. I've taken him to poker nights with the boys, so he gets that experience. Next week, he's coming with me. I've got a board meeting to go to. I'm saying, yeah, I know you're going to be bored here, and that's why it's called a board meeting. But come along and you'll get, you'll see what that kind of thing is about. And so I'm just trying to give those experiences without, and he'll come along and he does the right thing. And when I take him on those things, he comes along and doesn't take his phone or anything like that. He does pay attention. But I was just trying to, I was looking at it from that perspective, going, if it was me, if I to go back and do that again, so not wanting to change my life, but how would I advise myself to work out my own purpose? Because it's one thing for someone to get, usually it's through some sort of pain, as people have this experience and then they go, I want something different, and that's the trigger in most cases. As someone put it to me, you learn through pain until you get the wisdom to learn through joy. And so but I was trying to understand, how do you educate someone about finding their purpose? And I was like, how do you, if you were to take a young person that's actually receptive to that kind of thing, which is, kind of what I've got. I mean, 14 is probably getting to the point where, they can switch off and do their own thing. But if you were to take a young person, how would you talk about that and finding your purpose and what your purpose is in life? Or is it something you've got to go out and live a life a fair bit first before you actually even can understand the question?
Yes, it's an interesting thought sometimes, isn't it? Of we often try and all the wisdom we have and what we've been through, and then we have our children and think what I would like to have had at possibly that age, maybe not, I don't know. It's interesting, and not saying we shouldn't progress and shouldn't we and shouldn't we help support them. I think the answer is both, and in some ways, and you can't, like anything, you can't force the whole thing about discovering your purpose or reflecting on it. I mean, I know my my number 2 child. I've got 4, so I have to the order.
If I had my choice, that would have been my thing too. But we made 4. We only got
1. She interestingly, she writes my summary for my podcast, so she listens to or watches it on YouTube, and then writes a summary for me to put it on the platforms.
Yeah.
And she's exposing to all the wonderful people I interview, which is great. And we were talking the other week about careers and stuff, and then she said, "Oh, that lady who talked about this," and she started talking about purpose and stuff, and then so it came from her, and we had a conversation about it. But I didn't go into, which is obviously, I'm sort of always a coach, which often my kids go, "Oh, Dad, stop coaching us," and because I always just ask all lots of questions, and they always, even the other night, and also, "Oh, you ask those funny questions when they're trying to help decide something." I ask these Cartesian questions and just help them sort of. But I think the importance is, I suppose, making people see the value of knowing your purpose and the impact that has on your life and how you lead your life. And I think it goes back to, and I say this a lot, I feel like sometimes a broken record with individuals, that role modeling is the most powerful way to impact and influence anybody. if you're role modeling to your son about the fact that about investing in money and using that way, the fact that you offered him $1,000 and he says put $750 in the account and give me $250. I mean, that says it all, Damien. I mean, that's that you've modelled something, and I know you're paying the money, but he had a choice. You gave him a choice, and he took the choice, and the decision he made was, 3/4 in the account long term, and a quarter short term because I want to buy some trainers or whatever he wants to buy with it. And so you've modelled that, and you probably share about it. As soon as we start to try to impose, tell, all those sort of things, that's when you get, I would say, you get rebellion, you get people disinterested, unmotivated, because it doesn't work. It just, the best way is to show something and to say, I know my purpose. This is what it is, and this is how I lead my life. This is how it creates joy for me. This is how it creates energy for me. It's how it creates, how I help people. Well, and people see that, and you'll be surprised at what your son is observing. You'll observe far more than you realise. And if you interview him in 10 years' time on your podcast. Or get somebody else to interview him, and he'll reflect on all the things that you were like, really? I did that. Sometimes my girls tell me they always know I will always pick them up from anywhere in terms of give them a lift and always be there for them for that. And they just love that. And it's interesting how I used to sort of position it in my head slightly differently. I reframed it. I remember a lot of parents complain about picking their kids up being a taxi service, and
the best time you have them alone in the
well this is it. I reframed it as, this is an opportunity to have some quality time, whether they speak to me or not or be on the phone, doesn't matter. I'm present with my daughter in some capacity, and present is more important than just talking and communicating. Just being present and experiencing them, whether that's early morning, late, and I've been waiting in the car. Whatever it is they've been doing, I'm present. And I told them that, I think a few years ago. I told them that was always my motive, because their mum, I'm not with their mum anymore, always used to complain about giving them lifts, and they always, Dad always gives me lifts.
That would get you in a lot more trouble, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and I didn't do it for that. And they go, yeah, Dad really, they actually said this. He reframed it as, he wants to just spend some quality time. And I think that I do that. And again, I'm modeling something there, which I don't know what impact that'll be. It doesn't matter. I'm doing it because that's what I wanted to do. And I think there'll be things that you're doing that might be little small things in your head, just not trivial, but not huge, but he'll observe it, and he'll be observing more, not just consciously but unconsciously. And I think to me, that's how you inspire people with purpose. That's how you inspire people that anything is just role model it, be it, and whether that's in your family, in your friendships, in your organization, it doesn't really matter. The fact is that you went to a situation you weren't liking in the workplace, and you said it was either him or me, and then it was you. You left. But
it's happened a couple of times. I didn't learn the first time.
Yeah, but you did it out of your values, and that's you're standing on those, and that's really important. You're not compromising on that, and that's good. And when you don't compromise, it's quite tough at times. There's a bit of sacrifice that comes with that.
Yeah,
but you don't know the impact you had on other people who did that, observed that, and wonder why you left, and whether they said the truth or not doesn't really matter, but you have an impact. And when you observe, like, a leader in your organization stand up to somebody or dismiss somebody because of wrong behaviors, that sends a signal and creates that power of role modeling. And I think far more of us don't realize the impact we have the moment we walk into a room, whether that's with your friend, with your neighbor, your kids, with your organization, you are role modeling immediately. So how you portray yourself, what you say, how you behave, how you interact, everything you are. And so once you get, whether you got your clarity on your values or your purpose at all, it doesn't really matter. People will be observing, and so there's an also thing with that. If they're observing something you're saying, I want to be kind to people, that's whatever it is, and people observe that you're not, then obviously there's a bit of a dissonance will go in there. But continue to and provide opportunities to get your kids into environments where they're exposed to things, because what also that will do is, whether it'll come from, he'll end up talking to somebody else about this anyway, probably, because it's sometimes easier to talk to somebody objectively, isn't it? But as we discover things as we embrace the life that we're leading, and we get exposed to things or we don't get exposed. It doesn't really matter. I think it's just, and I think sometimes it's to hold things lightly with people. I think it's like whether it's kids or you're managing a team, we often think, I know what's best for them. We think that sometimes, but often do we know them? We're not walking in their shoes. We don't do we really know them? And so we might think that this might be a good idea for them, but it's allow them to, I guess, choose whether they want to walk on that path or want to experience that thing for themselves, rather than saying, I think this would be really good for you. But actually, and sometimes I know in parenthood we have to do a bit like that sometimes. Put them into clubs and create that discipline, like with the karate. I think that's really important. But I think certainly in the workplace, it's just providing ways and opportunities that people can experience something that they choose to do. Because if they choose and the motivations come from them, they'll embrace it far more and they'll enjoy it far more. Even though they might go, actually, tried it, that's just not for me. That's okay. That's fine. That's important as well.
Is part of that too, I mean, because as you were talking there, I was thinking about this whole role modeling and knowing yourself as well and finding yourself, because I've noticed from my perspective exactly what you're talking about. I'm aware that he's paying attention to a lot more than I thought he was paying attention to. For example, these type, when we had the lockdowns, and we're the lockdown kings down here. We've had so many, such long lockdowns. But
I think you get some medals for that, definitely.
Yeah, we definitely. But I liked it from the perspective, because what I did when we had those and had homeschooling, down here where I am at this house, I've got my desk set up here, and it's in the main living, because at the back I've got these big windows and I can see the tree. So it's a nice, I've got a forest behind me, that kind of thing looks great. But also set up my son's desk, sort of the same opposite set of windows, which is literally just over there. So there's my desk as a fireplace, and then there's his desk looking out over the windows as well. And that's how, and I, from when we were doing the homeschooling, I loved that, because I got to see so much and hear so much of his education that I never, responses to the teacher, all that kind of stuff, things that you don't get to see. So that was really cool. He got to see what I was doing work-wise, and I wasn't really aware of how much he was, because he'll be, even when he's not studying, also to where we are is there's a TV there which he plays video games, so he'll do his study and do that, but then he'll turn around and use the TV to play video games. So he's still in the same spot and we're still close to each other. And he's got earphones in. And I remember there was one time where it's something I was doing an interview like this where we were having a discussion, and he made some comment afterwards. Actually, and there was one that really stood out. And this is gross, but we were doing this interview, and then when it finished, as soon as I said see you, and we hung up, he let this really big fart rip, and he goes, "I've been waiting for you to finish forever to let that out." I'm like, why didn't you leave the room? But anyway. But that combined with, there was a couple other times where he made some comments about what we were talking about, I realized he was listening, and that's why now when I'm doing it, although he's not here now, but I always have the speaker on so he can, because I'm aware he's actually listening to this.
Mm.
And there's been times as well where I know he's going to be in the car with me, and I've had a meeting to do, phone meeting to do, and I've saved it or scheduled it so it's in the car and he's there and he can listen in.
Mm.
But from that perspective, again, coming back to finding yourself, knowing who you are, it's held me to a higher standard because I want to be that
Mm.
role model. So I was just wondering from that perspective, as if, and looking for this whole thing of going through this model of how to create that for someone younger to find that, would we put into that model going, well, part of it is, you being a role model. If you do that, because when you teach, you learn as well.
Mm.
Part of this is, going out, helping people, paying attention to what you're doing as to how that fits within whether that's right for you or not. Is that something, because I'm just wondering about that as we're talking about that, because I know that I've deliberately, like, taking him to the board meeting. I've set that up to do that, but hadn't thought through that process of, as you mentioned at the very start, finding yourself as a journey, and in through this role modeling, I'm actually finding myself in an even deeper way.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, isn't it, that during a phone call when your son's there, you feel probably slightly more aware of yourself and aware of what you're going to
Mm,
say because your
yeah,
son's, and that does
100%.
hold you to account in a
Yeah.
healthy way, actually. Obviously, you're not pretending, but it just heightens your awareness, and I think that's healthy,
Mm,
and I think it's also you know how he did respond in the pandemic and how respond to situations and
mm,
difficulties, and again, it's all eyes are on us all the time,
yeah.
and I think that is a way of observing, how you lead your life, and you're telling this is my purpose and this is what I do.
Mm,
Um, and I guess with trying to create, I suppose, a place where young people sort of discover a bit more of, or get the motivation of the purpose, but also
mm,
discover it. I guess it's providing them, choices, isn't it? Because it's important to we can't force anything. You must
mm,
discover your purpose. When a client comes to me, I don't we all we often end up there because I think it's always a good place to start, but
yeah.
I don't force it. It just happens, and it seems like this will, I've seen in my conversations with them initially, I think
Mm,
it might be a good place to start with this, and so I have that conversation. But I think even my own sort of young people I've got, I don't talk about purpose,
mm,
but I don't talk about knowing. Oh, actually, my eldest, we talk a bit more about it actually, and she's starting to discover her. But I don't consciously think the plan of that through. I don't think I think they need to know their purpose. I
mm.
think they do, but I don't think they need to know it. That sounds I'm saying something that's making sense here.
Yeah,
I
well, it comes
allow
back to that whole
them.
point of, do you have to have some sort of experience? I mean, to tell someone about, if you're driving a car and you hit a wet spot and you got to, and the back end starts to slide and you got to turn into it. That can, sound really great, but if you don't know how to drive a car, it really doesn't mean anything.
No.
And that's why I was just wondering, do we need to go through that process of learning, but with, some sort of guide? I know, from my experience, because I raced radio controlled cars when I was a kid, I read a lot about how to take a corner, all that kind of thing, which it it didn't really mean much at the time when I was young because I'd never driven a car, only the radio control car. But when I actually did get into a race car, I understood the cornering a bit better. So that's what I'm trying to wonder: is it a case of it's a bit of those both, where you got the theory, which you say, as you say, you can't beat that over people and tell them, you guys should do this because they've got no
Mm.
comprehension as to what that means. But having that framework around, um, this is, where am I going with this? Where you've got to, this role modeling. So you're, in a sense, learning, you're continuing on your journey because you've got experience, and that's what I'm looking at. It just through this conversation, I've become very aware of it. I was doing it, but not fully aware of what was happening there. I was doing it to guide my son, but hadn't really comprehended the complete value that I was adding to my own self in knowing myself and what I stand for, because it was on this journey. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective, that I'm still on this journey of knowing myself. And that's really, that being in that process has really enhanced me. No, and that's part of where I mentioned about the Richard Gere thing came from, is it's going, okay, I want to refine this and be, I know that there's times there where I'm getting a little bit anxious, if that's the right word, where I might react as opposed to staying calm. And so I become more aware of that. And through those conversations in front of my son, at that heightened awareness and wanting to be that good role model has helped me become even clearer about what that is. It's weird.
I think for me, it's trying to, I guess, giving people those opportunities for the experience or experience.
Yeah.
And so it's, if part of discovering your purpose is through exploring and experiencing stuff, you don't wake up and think, right, I want to, be a, business that helps people do this, But I don't think people wake up with that at all. They do life, and then things start to bubble up. And some people get that really young in the 20s. Some people just later. It doesn't really matter, I don't think. And I think it's just giving experiences. And I think my own sort of children, I've always encouraged them to experience stuff and go for things and not get too caught up on, you got to have a real valid reason why you're doing something. Just do it.
Well, that's why I'm coming back to you, because you mentioned about taking action. Just do something.
Just get them. My eldest, 6 years ago, was in a tough relationship at the time and all that, and then an opportunity came up to be an au pair for a friend of ours in Canada.
Oh, okay.
And she saw it and she says, "What do you think of this, Dad?" And just 6 months it was.
Yeah.
And I said, "Yeah, do it. It'd be great." So I just thought, great experience, live in another country, we know the friend, Canada feels safe, and all that sort of stuff. They speak English, or most of it does anyway. Just do it. And she's still there. So wrong decision for me. No. So she had no desire. Well, I've always exposed her to lots of traveling, and weirdly, somebody came round a few years ago, noticed that I think in every room in the house we either have a globe or a map.
Oh, okay.
So subconsciously, but for saying to explore, I don't know. And it's interesting, all three of them. Go away, move away, go as far away as possible. But no, she had no desire. Younger, talked about Canada, living none of that at all.
Yeah.
And then so she's gone out there and she did au pairing a bit, and then she ended up, I really like it here. Then she started to get into. She got a job there as a hairdresser, and then she became permanent residence, which obviously then opened up more opportunities. And then she decided to become a nurse. Okay. And again, nursing was not really on her agenda for a long time, and she's trained as a nurse out there now, and she's been a nurse and lots of travel nursing and loves it and enjoys it. And so, and then she's got some other, and I'm thinking, I don't mind. It's great to have, when people get caught up with this, people jump around a bit and all over the place. Do you know what? That's okay. That's okay. You're finding your thing and what really resonates. Some things resonate, but it's not really resonating hard enough. So you look for something else, and we've got to be careful that, we don't just look for the grass is greener type of thing. But I think that's a way of exploring things. But I say, comes to that point of, make sure you reflect along the way, so you are really honing that as well. You're not just blindly just jumping for something because you don't like it, or it's difficult, or it's hard, whatever it is. But yeah, so I've allowed that, and she's just experiencing life and finding, and we talk a bit more about purpose now. I never mentioned purpose at all before that. And in fact, I don't even talk about that and that. Okay, I talk about your passion, finding something that really resonates with you, what you really enjoy. I think, if you are going to work in that context, find something that you'll do, because you're going to do it for a long time. And all my girls, I've just, we used to do for lots of presents. Instead of giving them, for Christmas and sort of birthday, instead of giving them presents, material things, my wife and I would always say, well, let's give you an experience. And that could be, going to Paris for the weekend, or it could be we'll go and do something, going off in the Wales and do some sort of hiking and stuff. So more of an experience. And so I wanted them to have more experiences, because, things like, games and whatever, records sort of wear over time, but your memories don't. And that's what, and not only does it's great to have memories, but it shapes you and finds your thing. My middle one was, got into sort of walking and hiking with me. We used to do a lot with her, and then she ended up doing sort of Duke of Edinburgh sort of Gold Award, and it's like a thing you do, lots of camping and stuff like that. And so she's quite active, quite outdoorsy as well. And so it's just, I think, exposing them to aspects of life, and as a way of finding what their thing is, but also being open-minded, as certainly as a parent. If they come up with something, okay, and just in supporting them and encouraging them in that, not thinking, well, I don't think that's for you. And we always work it out and think what we know best, and think, actually, do you know what? Let it go. Let it just see what happens, really. Because regardless, if it's not their thing, and not easy, I told you so, they will learn something more about themselves in that process. And I think that's, with anything in life, is allowing people to be who they are, as in to be their own person as well. And I know it's important to get advice and inputs, and I'm saying we don't have that as well. But I think sometimes, we just got to do stuff. It's so easy to other people to say, "Oh, that's not a good idea," and not that we'd ignore people, and we've got to balance that wisdom with other people. But actually, sometimes you just got to go for it and think, okay, well, if it doesn't work, at least I've got to learn something about that situation, about myself along the way.
Yeah. Do you think, because I mean, that what it sounds like to me is it's part of that process when we talk about, do you have to have some life experience to be able to know who you are? And it sounds like from that, with your children, you've been giving them experiences to help them work out what that is. With that as well, I mean, if we're looking at it, because what you said, you allow, and you used it from the perspective of the other person. So with your children, so you allow them to be who they are. Do you think that applies to yourself as well? From that perspective, because sometimes where people grow up with expectations put on them, and they take that, and that's, and I'm just wondering, I've had to have a number of discussions about midlife crisis in the past couple of weeks with people, and I was just wondering from that perspective, is that part of how you find, or how you know yourself? Is part of that is allowing yourself to be who you are rather than trying to live other people's expectations.
Oh, so, totally. And I think, we all get caught up, certainly when we're younger, with people pleasing, with what our parents think we ought to do, or what society thinks the best thing to do for this situation. And I myself, I went to university sort of because my mum wanted me to go to university, because you want one of a child. I was the third. I was the third in line, as in last in line, I should say, third. And nobody had gone to university. And my mum had this thing about university, the be all and end all of life. And it's not. I mean, my other kids, one of them has gone to university, two of them gone to university, one isn't, but that's fine. I'm fairly, it doesn't matter how you get there in terms of, and so I probably reluctantly went and did it because that was the right thing to do, I think.
Mm.
It's done me okay. I'm not saying it hasn't, but I've, I suppose, lived with that, wanting to always, I guess, please your parents. And I think it's important to be aware of, what expectations are you leading by?
Mm.
Is it your partner? Is it your parents? Is it your society, your neighborhood, whatever it is you think? I think it's important to be aware that we do it truly for ourselves. And it
Mm.
can be quite hard, that, because often
That's what I was
it's
gonna say.
people don't really perhaps know you for who you really are.
Mm.
Um, and I think it's quite a tough. Takes courage, takes sort of a bit of bravery to think this. And I know with my own girls, I've tried to just say, even my one who's doing a master's in neuroscience, and she's sort of bouncing around a bit in terms of what she's trying to decide what to do. And then the other day she comes out with, I think in time I want to have a yoga retreat. That's what I want to be. I want to be a yoga teacher. It's like completely left field. Thinking, okay, where did that come from? Okay, and I went, okay, that's great. That sounds great. It makes yeah, just work towards it. That's fine. I mean, I encouraged her and think, but I would never have ever even thought that of her at
Yeah.
all. And it's interesting. And I'm really pleased that she was okay to say that rather than just hold it down. I'm just going to put it out there, and rather than go, oh, you can't do that. You've done all this education, that, which is, I know what my mum would do. That's how
Mm.
she would do it. And so, no, I think it's, but I think I think a lot of us lead our lives with other people's expectations, and I think it's important to recognize it, but then think, how do I navigate out of this? How do I, do my own thing and be
Mm.
myself? And sometimes we do it in a way that can be quite rebellious. I sort of, when I went to university, so I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to university, but I'm going to go as far away as possible. So I did. I'll go to university,
That's
but
like
I'm
me in
going
the
right.
army. It's like I'm going to go to the other side of the country.
Well, exactly. I almost did the same. And so I got a bit of defiance, very
Yeah.
defiant, and I said, I'm not going back home again, and I haven't, not moved back over there.
Yeah.
And so we got to be careful we don't get defiant as well, and
Mm.
then that starts to conjure up certain behaviours which are not very nice and helpful, and we get a little bit prickly with situations. But actually, again, when you discover your purpose or start to realise that, then you can start to share why you're doing what you're doing, because you've got this thing or
Mm.
passion or whatever it is. However you share it with somebody makes it easier then to overcome those perhaps pressures of expectations of, well, we've always done this, or I always thought you'd make a great doctor, and then you're deciding, actually, you've spent whatever 7 years trying to become a doctor, but didn't
Mm.
really want to do it, and then you become a doctor, and then now you're pursuing I don't know, becoming a yoga teacher, for example, and how you push against that. But if people then realise the bigger meaning or the bigger purpose, then they might help them understand why you're making those such decisions, I think. So it does help you, I think, with sharing that with certainly people close to you.
Love that you mentioned defiance there. Because I know, I mean, I look at some of those, even things that I mentioned earlier. A lot of that was defiance, I'm wondering, as you were talking about that, how much of it, the question of allowing yourself to be you, and in this process of finding yourself, it's like, well, how do you, um, how do you actually listen to yourself? And maybe I'm colored because that was my objective. My New Year's resolution was to listen more, and not just to other people, but listen to myself more. And
Mm.
and I look at that from the perspective when the times there where I was being defiant, um, I wasn't really listening. It was just like, this is my point of view, and you either agree with me or not, and I'm going to go. And that was part of my journey. Whereas I look at that now, I would have a very different discussion about
Mm.
resolving it and working through that. But I'm looking at it from that, and because again, I'm coming back to me being lazy and want to try to find a more efficient way of finding yourself.
Mm.
And it's like, is it part of that process of listening, to yourself, being able to learn to listen, and having that skill. And because I'm thinking about from my perspective, if I had have not been, I mean, there's an element of standing, and that's part of, what do you stand for? There's an element of standing up for what's right for you, but certainly and then there's ways of going about that. So looking at that from that perspective of, take that mine incident with guy drove over the cables. Now, obviously, it's a safety risk,
Mm.
but how much of me being defiant and saying he goes or I go actually solved that from happening again? If I'm looking back
Mm.
at it now, I'd be going, probably didn't change a thing.
Mm.
Had no effect at all. So was I, and I'm not saying don't be defiant, but I'm just putting it in the context of what I was looking at, going, I wasn't really listening to what was important to me at that point in time, is where I'm taking this. I
Mm.
was I was just being defiant, saying that's wrong. I'm going to do this. Um, but if I had really been concerned about, and I take that because I work with a lot of construction companies now, and I know that the elements they have and how they go about safety. Had I really been concerned about the safety, it would have been, okay, let's look at the procedure of what happened, how we do that, and let's resolve that way. But that wasn't my
Which
purpose at
is
that
the
point in time.
you just give a wonderful example of why purpose is so powerful, because then you
Yeah,
obviously played it back now. This is my purpose about helping others
yeah,
or create safe environment, whatever it is.
yeah.
You go back, why am I here? Okay, how do I solve that in this context? And then
Mm,
it makes you more collaborative, makes you more creative, makes you more open-minded. And I know, sorry, just slightly distracted.
yeah,
Remember back in the pandemic time,
yeah,
and I was talking to a number of CEOs, and I remember one who was, I knew they had a sort of purpose-driven organization, and he slightly overwhelmed and slightly in shock, as we all were, what was
yeah.
going on. And I said, "Oh, have you got like a purpose statement or mission statement?" So yeah, we have. I said, "Well, has anything changed in the context of the pandemic?" He said, "Well, not really, because most mission or purpose statements are quite much bigger than the company and
Mm,
far-reaching." I said, "Well, the only thing that's changed is the how and the timing."
mm,
And so I said, go back to your team
mm,
and just talk about the mission, dwell on it, and use it as a way of inspiring you and helping you sort of your team to lift their gaze a little bit more and almost center them, I guess.
mm,
And so he went back, did that with his team, and came back. He says, "Oh, it's been amazing." He says, everyone just started to just lift their gaze, see things differently. They started to get more creative. They started to work on ways of working, of how they could get to that mission statement again.
mm,
Knowing full well things had changed, and it became a very powerful tool. It energized them again, and so that can be the same. This situation, like you had that your scenario there, so it can become really a helpful tool of
mm,
then helping you navigate difficulties or things you might encounter as we go forward. And so yes, so that's whether that's personally or corporately, it doesn't matter. It's the
mm.
same sort of principles
Yeah.
at large. So you were saying, trying to get my train of thought now. So I just lost my
Yeah,
train of
because
thought.
what you were talking about there was having that. I mean, what he did was that CEO listened to you and then took that. And they had that purpose, but then they were able to go back, and because they'd listened to what you were talking about, and that's where I was taking that from that perspective of, putting it to allowing yourself to be who you are, which is,
Mm.
from that perspective, using that organization, they'd had who they are, they had their purpose. But it sounds like they'd stopped allowing themselves to be who they are because they got stuck in the
Mm.
pandemic, and then you opened that door again, so they go, okay, we can actually be who we are. Um,
Mm.
and I was wondering how much of that relates to listening, being able to listen to yourself, listen to what's going on, and I was again putting in the framework of, I know we're coloring because we're parents, looking at my son, going, guiding him as to, how to work out his purpose, or, knowing himself,
Mm.
and how much of that relates to being able to be able to listen, because we know from, majority of, and I'm very much guilty of that in my younger life of, you know, when someone's talking, too busy thinking about what I'm going to say next as opposed to
Mm,
listening. Whereas
mm,
I know I was a good listener before making the resolution this year, but it's amazing how much more making that resolution to listen has dramatically changed who I am.
mm,
Knowing myself, because I'm listening to both what they're saying, I'm listening to how I'm reacting and connecting it to that purpose, which is why
mm,
I'm asked before about is it better to try and, even if you're not clear about what it is, just making a purpose that's got something to do with helping people, just acting,
mm,
deciding and acting, as you said, do something.
mm.
And then through that, it might not work, but you've made that process. And I'm just trying to put a framework to go, well, how do we know ourselves? And is it a case of, you know, pick something, play with it,
Mm.
and see how that comes back? But you've got to be able to listen. I mean, from that's what I was trying to understand with that.
Yeah, I think do something, whatever that is. Just
Mm,
whether that's it could be a hobby, work
mm,
thing, entertain, whatever it is. Do
yeah.
something, explore, experience, and so that's almost the getting out there and in some form of capacity of
Mm,
how you do that. It's then how do you listen to yourself? And we know that listening is a skill. I think
mm,
people think as we listen, we've all got this innate ability to listen, but I don't think we have at all. It's a thing we need
just need to
to
shut up
develop
most of the
because
time.
exactly because we're pretty rubbish at it, really, generally.
Yeah.
I think listening to yourself is probably harder than listening to somebody else in terms
Mm,
of in a conversation and listen to who you are and whether you do that in the moments. Do you listen to what triggering you, your feelings, what's going on, all that sort of stuff, how
mm,
you're interacting, how do you all that. um so you get and so often, like anything, you must that's like in the moment listening is, I think, even more difficult because
mm,
um so it's almost like have some almost what you call off pitch type of listening to
yeah.
yourself, because the more you do off pitch, it becomes on pitch. Giving a football analogy or a game analogy, you'll do it more in the moment. And I think, journaling is a really powerful way of doing that.
Mm,
And there's different ways you can buy books, and there's ways of doing it, but just literally writing, thinking, whether you do, I've done a lot with video vlog, speaking out my thoughts
mm,
type of thing. So however you do it, whatever works for you,
mm,
thinking about whether it's particular events, particular days, particular moments, just journaling is basically creates that reflection. And that's
mm,
what you want to do. And that's where you learn. That's where you realize, okay, I felt really uncomfortable in that meeting. But what was it about that meeting? Was it the people?
mm,
Was it the environment? Was it me? That, oh, was that a late night? Whatever it is, you just start to hone yourself a little bit more, become really aware. And the more you do it, feels really laborious and really
mm,
quite intense. But if you do that quite regularly, it can take 5 minutes a day to do it. My one of my daughters has got like a journal thing, and it talks about, it starts with gratitude and things like that. So there's a whole host of stuff, but it's a way of just, I think at the end it's like a reflecting on the day as well, in terms of
mm,
what we thought about the day, what went well, what was difficult, that type of stuff, and you start to then learn about yourself. And I think that's, to me, is where you start to listen to yourself. And the more you do it in a almost a process pragmatic way, that way, then when you get into the moment and you walk into a room or you have a conversation and you suddenly think, oh, I feel a bit weird here, or I'm not sure about this, or I feel really
mm,
excited, then you can just sort of reflect quite on the go type of stuff, or just after that conversation with somebody.
mm,
So I think, for me, that was one of the ways. Is just, and you need time for that. You need to put some time away aside this, and
mm,
that's to me is the process. And so, yeah, go out and do stuff, experience stuff, but then you got to have a feedback loop, I guess, of reflecting, which is journaling is a good way of doing it. Or any other way of reflecting for you, in terms of, might be walking in nature, might be running, but
mm,
provide an opportunity where you reflect on your life and process your life, because you can't discover your purpose or what you like until you process that. Because we get so much thrown at us, and we need to take some time out just to process that.
Yeah, it's important to be able to do that. That's what I was wondering from that processing, being able to listen, and just even from a practical point of view, being able to be aware of that because, and I'll relate, like I do, um, from time to time do work with courts and, um, work on cases, and there's times where I have to get up and speak. And I've had those experiences with standing up in court, and then through, and I think I'm a reasonably good speaker in public. Um, I've done a lot of training, so I've been up in front of people, and I forgot, which I shouldn't have, because I have a whole program on negotiation, the environment is a source of power in and of itself, and courts are intimidating places. And through COVID, I'd forgot that because we were doing it online. So
Mm,
I'm was comfortable, and then the first day back in a real courtroom, I hadn't worked that out. I hadn't made that. I just assumed, been doing this really, really, and been getting really good at it. Constantly getting better and better. And I hadn't made that transition to this environment is really intimidating,
mm,
by itself. And I fumbled all over the place the first time back in a courtroom. And and I remember coming home thinking about it, going, what went on there? And I was really listening to what was going on for me, and I thought through that, as you say, reflected on it, um, got back into, where confidence comes from, that kind of thing. And through that process, the very next time I went in, it was completely different experience. Um,
mm,
and and that's where I was, can run from that practical point of view, that this whole listening and knowing yourself, how we apply that in life, because that was one specific area for me that it was really knowing myself was going, okay, I know that I can do this. I've done it before. Not only that, in this
mm,
process, even though we've been, locked down for 2 years,
mm,
in Australia, we were, or Victoria certainly. um, And it wasn't even the lockdown, it was more that they were shut even though, things open, the court still did things online. Um, and then being able to, okay, um, walk into that experience, and maybe I should have been more prepared or whatever, but that's a hypothetical question because I never know the answer. Um, but then to have that experience and go, oh, I mean, I remember it vividly. I was sitting there going, I'm fumbling over my words here, and I shouldn't be. I've prepared. I've got everything ready, and I'm just completely lost. Um,
mm,
and it's just it was an interesting experience from a practical perspective. And I'm repeating myself a bit, but this allowing yourself. I'm trying to link it back. That's what I was going. Linking this back to allowing yourself to be who you are, and that's really what it came to, was that to let go and go, okay, this is the environment, put that aside, be who you are, don't worry about the environment, just
mm,
be who you are. And when I was able to reframe that way, that's
mm,
what allowed me next time to go in there and just, it was almost, the environment didn't, affect me anymore.
mm,
So I was trying to put that into a practical example of how to use this, not just from knowing yourself, but in real life circumstances. It's not just,
mm.
I have this overarching, picture of the world, but also too, it's, knowing where I'm going, but also in everyday life, knowing yourself is really important for just how you deal with situations.
Mm.
So that was a
Uh,
practical example.
and often we get in our own way as well in life.
Mm,
We often, you get caught up with whether it's your experience of going back into court again,
mm,
sort of, and that can then trigger you next time, and that's all you're thinking about.
mm,
And rather than thinking, okay, that's just thoughts going in my head. Okay, just that's okay. It's just a thought. Let it go, and
mm,
then move on, and just allow. And rather than to get caught up with things and just
mm.
not getting our own way. I think often we do. We
Yeah.
put things in there that
I love
make it
that.
difficult, and already start saying this is not going to go well, or this is going to be really difficult. Well, it will be, because you're just sort of telling yourself already. And so I
Mm,
think that's really, and again, I'm increasingly more aware of what I do say and my
Mm,
self-talk. And, when I go to not that I do rituals or anything like that, but I go to like conversations with, like networking this morning, I'd
mm,
say to myself, I'm looking forward to connect with people today, looking forward to how I can help people. So I sort of set up an intention. I don't set any objectives. I don't look
mm,
on what leads are going to get. It's not, because that's just so binary, and you come across quite transactional in that way. And I also, so I look for connecting people. I look how I can help people, and that's my intent. And I sort of
mm,
go into a meeting in that context. And so and I think about when I meet, got a client later on, I'm thinking, how can I really help them, get clarity on this? How can I be a real help for them today? And so
mm,
I sort of set some intents. And so, and I'm aware of that. And then, what I also try and do now more and more, not always, I try and sort of check in on myself as I go. And so I just
mm,
see how I'm feeling. What's this meeting? Am I bringing the value I'm supposed to bring? Am I bringing the impact? All that very quickly. Just go through that and think,
mm,
actually, am I enjoying this? And that's great. I'm in a good conversation here, or this coaching is going really well, or well, actually, and that's, as a coach, that's that constant sort of feedback, or I always think I get triggered by stuff. Is that just me? Is it them? Or is it just nothing really?
mm.
Sometimes it's just how it is, and it's just a feeling. As long as we don't attach too much meaning sometimes to things, it's okay to have some feelings. So I'm trying to be a lot more aware of me as well in situations, because often we get caught up with observing other people when we're listening and how they're reacting, but being intuitively thinking, how am I reacting to this? Why am I raising my voice? Why am I going? Why am I suddenly increasing the speed? Suddenly, why am I feeling all a bit
Mm,
agitated? And just trying to be aware of that. And it's not easy, because we get caught up with things, and then. But I think the key thing, and it goes back to that, make sure certain things that perhaps bothered you or weren't so sure about that. Just take a moment to reflect. And I think that's not been a broken record, but that's where you learn, where you reflect and you process it, and then understand yourself better, and then you change for next time, or you don't change if you needed to, or was it just them, or do you know what I mean? It's just, and at the end
mm.
of the day, your sort of reality is not true really, because that's
Your
it's
reality.
just
It's
uh,
your reality. It's not the
exactly, and I think it's been a bit sort of holding things in that sort of way really, not getting too caught up with things, but just being aware of situations, and I'm being far more um purposeful about that now. And so when I interact with people, I'm just thinking,
mm.
I'm almost scanning myself of feelings, thoughts, and then just being more aware of that. So yeah, just again, this is the thing I'm doing at the moment myself, really.
But I love what you're saying there, because it is that combination of, because and I wrote down four, but there was a number of statements that you said that were all along the lines and all linked back to listening. Was you said checking in on yourself. I can't read my writing there. Awareness, reflecting, and scanning myself. And it's interesting that you were saying, because when we're talking about knowing yourself, I mean, if you're not listening, if you're not reflecting, not scanning what you're doing, so it's a combination of both, and this ability to listen to other people, but also it's almost like you've got to have this dual thing happening where you're really listening to what's going on, but you're also listening to
Mm,
your own reaction. And
mm.
I'm loving this. Is really cool. I'm very excited by this now, because it's like, because again, me being the efficiency Nazi, it's like I want to do this as because I'm like going, okay, I can listen here, but I've got this dual thing happening. My brain's doing two things at the same time. I can multitask, um, and I'm listening, but I'm also scanning myself for my reaction so I can react in a better way. And I'm just noticing that from that. I mean, again, a practical point of view, because having these conversations where you and I are having now, they're very natural. And I noticed the slight difference I was doing with the radio I mentioned before, CEO of a radio station, but also have a show on that radio.
Mm.
And it's scripted. We prepare it and script it, and there's a little bit of ad libbing in there. But if you ad libbing, you really it's there's very few people that can ad lib very well and tell a good story at the same time. It really has to have some thought go into it. Um, and I noticed, from that perspective, there was, that same sort of thing where I'm starting to rush it as I'm saying it rather than speak naturally. And it was, again, that awareness. And the other thing too was talking when you finish and you're raising your voice and you lose a bit of power. And when people ask a question, there was, this whole thing when you finish a question, you finish on a downtone as opposed to an uptone. Like, what do you mean? It kind of loses its impact. And so I spent a lot of focus on those kind of elements while I'm doing that situation, which I think has helped broader speaking as well. But this whole knowing yourself, it's so connected to actually really listening to yourself as well. You said scanning, being aware. It doesn't happen without that, really.
Mm. No, totally, and I think it's important to, as I say, you experience the world, and then you then understand that experience. I guess that's what you're doing. It's the feedback loop in essence. That's what's going on here. How does who I am experience this context? Why am I feeling in it? It's those sort of questions, isn't it? And whether you do that in the moment or afterwards, it's important. I think it's also good in the context of we do have blind spots to ourselves and to who we are, and I think it's not that we always had to have psychometric tests, but they can be useful as well in terms of discovering a bit more who you are.
No, not one of those.
But I've done quite a few of those. But just generally having, external inputs from people who you trust and respect can feed into you in terms of what they notice about you, what they observe about you, what they think you're good at, and what you're passionate about that you perhaps don't realize. And this is something perhaps you can do to not that you want to do a self-fulfilling prophecy approach or a loaded thing you might say to your son. I can see you seem really disciplined at stuff, and you start sharing
all the time.
Yeah, so it's sharing things you observe that perhaps they're not aware of, and other people sharing with you that actually I really like the way you do, and you think, oh, really, I never noticed that, and then you start having people observe and share things, and trying to create that can be quite tricky sometimes, whether that's with a partner or a boss or however, or a friend. And whether you have a frank conversation, say, what do you think I'm good at? What's my thing? What do you observe about me? And I really like where you blah blah blah. And you go, all right, okay, I didn't realise that, and the impact it has as well. It can be really quite sort of confidence building. Suddenly you think, wow, people really think I'm this, and I thought I was really good at that, but people are observing that and noticing that, and so I think that's the sort of the blind spot bits that you're not aware of, and your partner may be a bit more, or somebody closer to you might say, well, actually, when you go to a room, you do this slightly annoying thing, and or you railroad people into conversation, or whatever it is, and so that's that again. Pointing out some of the things that perhaps you're not aware of, or. Or you make people look really scared with your tone of voice or how you go about things. You can make people feel, because you've got a sense of authority about you. And sometimes I do that sometimes with my children. I can be a bit harsh sometimes, and my partner, my wife will go, "Oh, I think you're a bit." I'm just telling them, I wasn't feeling angry or cross. So you came across that way, and it's that. So it's that. Again, getting that all angles point of view.
It's interesting, that point, because I had a very similar thing with a partner that I was with who used to think I was yelling at her when I was speaking my normal tone, but obviously it was, I took that on board, and it's actually served me very well to learn to speak in a softer tone and having that awareness. I love the point that you mentioned about there with you mentioned when you mentioned my son as well, because it was and having that um, it's not projecting. The example, one of the I do this all the time. He was telling me about his video game that he was playing, and he'd spent 9 hours trying to kill his boss. And my instant response was, "That's awesome! Look at the discipline that you've got. That's going to translate into other things when you're out in the real world."
not. Why are you wasting your time in 9 hours on
it
a
was
computer game?
Yeah, so that was the framework I put it under. It's like, oh, look, the discipline that you've got to actually, and the
Brilliant.
goal that you set that you're going to get there, and you kept at it until you achieved. That's going to serve you really well when you're out in the real world.
Absolutely, persistence. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I wonder.
Well, no, that's framing a positive. That's taking something that potentially could be perceived as being negative, couldn't it?
Yeah, well, and partly too, it's showing that I support him in what he's, and it's not like he hasn't done his homework and not getting good marks, and it's his free time if he wants to do that. Well, who am I to tell? I mean, if someone come to me and I've done everything I need to do, and I'm having my free time, I'm building Lego because I like my Lego, and someone said, "Oh, you shouldn't do that with your free time," I'd probably tell them to F off. It's like it's like my free time, go away, and isn't that part of, again, that role modeling? It's like you're free to choose. It's your life. Although I do tell him, it's like, you're not going to live here forever, so you better work out something. Because I said to him, I said, do you know what you want to do, with your life? And he goes, no. And I said, you're just going to copy Dad and make the money way he does? And he goes, yep. And that was But I want to come back to what you were talking about, the blind spot. You mentioned blind spots, and we have these blind spots. And the neurolinguistic term, you don't know what you don't know. How do you become, if you're finding yourself, and is it a case of being around, like you said, having a partner or something that pulls you quiet and says, when you're in the room, you've done this and it hasn't come across well. Is it having that, or do you need to have those coaches around you, or can you do it through self-awareness, do you think? How do you think that works?
I think we need other people. I think we are, no man or woman is an island. I think we need to have other people to support us and help us. And whether that's a coach, that I can create a huge amount of awareness for my clients. And they might be saying a certain word. Thinking, do you say this all the time? And that's not very helpful. And so there's that. I think people who you really trust, partners, could be a line manager who will, and it might be a specific, like you say, when I'm presenting today, could you I'd like, not on the day, but a few days later, could I have some feedback on what I present? So that's a good way of in a work context, putting it into a tangible thing. Or it could be, depending on your relationship and how secure you feel, and how good they are as well in terms of modeling that. But to, on your one-to-ones, you say, can I have some feedback on whether this, and using examples is always better, because it sort of crystallizes it a little bit better as well. Or it could be just that they just, you got to ask for it, quite, rather than, well, you might have a boss who actually says, when you do this and do that, do you ever see the reactions of people's faces when you're sort of holding that knife while you're talking to people, or something silly like that? And it was like, yeah, we'll do it. Now it could be just, and I used to work with people, my team, and I'd pick up little things like that, little nuances that perhaps they weren't aware of, but that'd be through a relationship, through trust, that'd be through me sort of working with them, that knowing that my intent is to help them become better, and not to just pull out their faults. It's not about pulling out faults, but it's got to be in a relationship. And I think if you've got somebody who wants that, then it's obviously even better, because of the motivation, they want to learn, and you might want to support them with that. And actually, I'm going to observe you, and I'm actually going to tell you, actually, you don't do it anymore, or actually it's got so much better. So I think we need people around us to do that. I mean, I have obviously my wife is an element of that. I have a coach myself that helps me come up with things. I might share with her. She's my sort of coach supervisor, so I might share with where I got stuck or I felt stuck with a client, and so she will unpick that and then start to hone my own self-awareness at that particular moment. And so, it's something I do with my clients as well, where they'll give me an example where something went well or didn't go so well, and then we'll almost pick through that actual example, and then they start to go, oh yeah, and then you can see these moments, they suddenly realize something because we've almost reflected and helped them reflect on that moment. And that's where the sort of coaching comes in and really helps them open that sort of blind spot they weren't aware of. And obviously there is the whole 360 psychometric type of thing is another good way. But I think for me with those, the important thing is as long as it's facilitated afterwards really well, they can be really helpful and give you some real insights, but it's got to be done in a way that's almost like coached through afterwards and properly.
And where do you put in that framework when you're knowing yourself, and this probably more falls under what you stand for? Because sometimes, I mean, we can go through this whole process of, it's a fine balance of looking for places to improve and then beating yourself up because you've got all these things to fix. Because if you ask people, they'll come up with lots and lots of ideas of how to, you could be better, so to speak. So from that perspective, is it something that we need to just choose what's right and put some? Because I know from my perspectives, there's some things that I've just I've pointed it out and I go, yeah, I know that. I won't say that to them, but I'm aware of that, but it's not something I'm going to focus on right now because it takes habit and change to fix things. Is that, do we need to put that in context as well?
Yeah, I think it's important to have that sort of dialogue, really, dialogue with yourself, dialogue with those people, and it's it's being open for that conversation, isn't it? I think that's the key thing with this is that you want to learn, you want to become a better version of yourself, and we know that we will have blind spots, and whether that's in a context of performance, observe things, or it's just how you are with people. And I think we can't fix everything all at once, and it's focus on it. And it could be you share. Actually, I feel like you've decided to be listen more this year to yourself and to perhaps others. And you might put that as an accountability and say, actually, I want you to, this person, I want you to be my sort of checking on this. Am I doing that more? And is there anything you observe that perhaps I'm not doing as in that context? So you're almost focusing on a learning goal or whatever you want to call it. Makes it quite focused and quite sort of robust in that way, I think, and gets away from that whole, what about this, and this, and you feel like absolutely paralyzed with, I'm really rubbish, aren't I? Yeah, no, actually, no. It's just the way you move your eyebrows sometimes when you talk. It just okay, but no. So I think it might be helpful just to be a bit more where you think yourself. But again, what you don't know neither as well. So it's good to have that bit of both of input from the externally, but not being overloaded with areas to sort of work on, I think, because that can be quite sort of paralyzing, to be honest.
Yeah, that was, I think, the point that I was trying to get, especially for listeners, that you don't have to try and fix everything all at once. No, you don't have to try and fix everything at all either. Everything.
No.
Cool. It's been great, Julian. I know you've got to go, and I need to go to bed too. Actually, it's been a long few days. So,
Yes.
But it's been wonderful chatting with you. There's so much covered in this. I enjoy going through it and checking it out and looking at everything we've covered. But thanks again for catching up.
Well, thanks, Damien. As always, love this conversation. It always makes me think, and always afterwards I have this sort of reflection on our conversation. So it's really appreciated, and thank you for hosting so well.
Thank you for being part of the Share.Care community and helping people around the world prosper. you're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.